Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here. What a night last night. I gotta give some kudos to Laser App and Redtail for putting that party together. I go to a lot of conferences, and that was probably one of the most fun evenings I've had in a long time. So kudos to those guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about utilization and really getting into, this is a technology conference, but fundamentally the reason people buy technology is to create business value. And I'm going to talk about, well, how do you map the technology to business value? I'm going to talk about utilization as the mechanism to do that, and then really give you an actionable model to use to sort of think about that whole progression. So that's what we're going to cover today. I've got about 25 minutes here, so we're gonna get rolling pretty quick. So first off, if you really think about it, 100% of the financial value of any of these investments is tied to what it does for your business. You know, if you're buying a piece of technology and it's not reducing the cost of existing processes, it's not increasing retention or enabling you to charge more for your services, or it's not being able to enabling you to attract new clients or meet unmet needs, you're not going to get a return. And I think a lot of times we focus so much on the tool, and we've got to get it running, we've got to get it installed, we've got to be able to make sure it's integrated properly, and then we just assume magically that everyone will want to use it because it's new and better than what we had. And I think inevitably we realize that's not always the case, because people are pretty innovative, they find workarounds. So a lot of times what will happen is that while the new technology will be there, users will either try to take what they used to do in the way they used to do it and jam it into the new tools and be frustrated because it doesn't work exactly the way the old process worked, or they'll simply ignore it to say, well, you know, my assistant does this, I know this is better, but I don't have any pain, and what I've got works just fine as it is. So, all right, so let's just break it down. As I talk to advisors, what do they really want? And this is really, applicable to any technology. Ultimately, they want to make more money, they want to work the less or the same, have happier clients and happier employees. That's what the advisor wants. So how do you put tools and technologies in terms that your advisors actually care about? And these are the frameworks. Now, internally, there's a little bit different approach towards it. And one of the best practices we continually encourage firms to look at is define what does success look like. Success, I can assure you, is not flawlessly executing the technology implementation. That does not necessarily yield anything. So up front, knowing that you're going to be wrong, lay out, what do we expect? How many users are going to use it? If they use it, what is going to be the outcome? And how do we tie the actual outcome to the original business case? We're all good at putting business cases together up front. What we tend to be much less good at is following through and watching that business case materialize on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis to determine what the real ROI is going to be on that investment. So that is a critical skill. All of our clients, I am just continually coming back time and time again to say, what is the ROI on this? What are we actually getting from this investment? We put a lot of time and a lot of energy in. So I can't emphasize that enough, that as hard as you work on the technology itself, you've got to be able to work equally hard on making sure that the return materializes. Otherwise, when you go back for budget next time, and I remember a CEO basically pounding his fist on the desk to say, I just spent all this money, you're coming back to ask me for more, and I haven't even seen any proof that what we just spent is being used and worked at. As a matter of fact, when I talk to our advisors and I ask them, hey, are you really using this? The answer is no. So if you want to create momentum in terms of an operational perspective and be able to get continued investment in new technology, you've got to prove that the existing investment is actually paying off. And frankly, the highest ROI thing you can do is leverage what you already have and show that through your leadership and ingenuity, you've been able to increase the returns that the firm have gotten versus always looking for that next new investment. Again, both are certainly important. the next slide. So what do you need to do that? So what's the key? Effective utilization. So one of our mantras at ActiFi, and I probably say this on a daily basis, both internally and when I'm talking to clients, is there's this hierarchy. People trump process, process trumps technology, and technology is critical to building a scalable and efficient business. If you think of the logic, let's try the other way around. Let's say we build flawless technology. I mean, it is implemented, it is state of the art, it works perfectly. But no one knows how to use it. Our processes stink, and then our people don't actually use them. What business value do we get? Do we get any credit that we have flawlessly executed on the technology piece? Again, if we get the technology piece right and the process piece right, again, if the people don't change their behavior and don't adopt in a way that generates value, again, we don't succeed. And what I'll tell you, having spent 25 years in this industry as an advisor, as an executive, as a technologist, I would consider myself now a human behavioralist, because when I look at the root cause of why didn't this particular capability yield the benefit that we knew was possible, pretty much every single time, the fundamental root cause is a behavioral change problem, that we were not able to, for whatever reason, get our users to use these tools in an effective manner. And that's harder than it seems. And so what I would encourage you to do is just begin with that end in mind, knowing that the behavioral change part is truly the hardest. So what's your guidebook to that? And I would say the process playbook is the key. Process is that linkage between the behavioral change in the people and the technology tools. Because if you're going to drive a behavioral change, you got to determine, well, what is the behavior I'm trying to drive, and how do I make it clear and succinct in terms of not just using the technology, but using it in a way that drives real business value. So first off, what we tend to find is that everyone has a different definition of what a defined process is. I do this all the time. I will go into a firm and they'll say, oh, no, you don't understand, Spence. You know, our processes are defined. We certainly understand them. Well, there's two things that I find. Number one is everyone's definition of what a defined process is different. And number two, the level of specificity and clarity of those processes typically do not match up to what's required to actually orchestrate the technology in a way that aligns to it. It's too high level. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do is go through the exercise. You've got a team of folks. Hey, we've got a defined process. All right, if we've got a defined process, let's all take out a piece of paper, write the term defined process. First of all, let's define what is that? What equates at our firm to a defined process? And then draw a picture. The old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is really true. I think it's absolutely critical to not discuss these things verbally, but actually have a reference point, a visual reference point, where people can take their finger and point to and say, okay, we're talking about step 3, we all have our finger on step 3, and we're ensuring clarity as to what the process is. Because the secret is that the actual implementation using workflow engines and using all this fancy technology is relatively easy if everyone is on board and crystal clear as to what it is you want the tool to do, what the sequence of steps and actions is. And again, we've spent a lot of time configuring different workflow engines and so forth, and the challenge is never, well, the tool, we can't configure, it's too hard to configure. Now, sometimes there's some technical limitations from a workflow engine standpoint, but almost always it's an alignment issue. It's saying, well, we configured it the way you said. Well, that was the way John said. That's not the way I work. So those are important considerations. One of the things that we tend to find in terms of one of the best ways to define processes in a way that can be easily translated into technology tools is using swim lane diagrams and business process modeling tools. So again, it's fine to start with a Word document, but ultimately you need to understand the relationships. One of the things that's important, as you see on this diagram, to have a really defined process, you need to understand what stage it is, where the handoffs are, what the decision points are. It needs to be clearly articulated. If it's just written down in a checklist form, you lose some important information relative to handoffs. And what I'd say in terms of process improvement, a lot of times where the real opportunities lie is when those swim lanes get crossed. It's when there's handoffs. If you can minimize the number of handoffs, you can drive increased efficiency and you can drive lower error rates. Because anytime work changes hands, there's an opportunity for things to get lost in translation. Okay. Next, we talk a lot about technology integration. That's a topic that's certainly widespread. I've heard a lot of presenters talk on that. What I'd like to do is just stop for a minute and define. When we say integration, that's one of those terms like workflow. What the heck does that mean? You know, I can say, and I'll give you some very specific examples. I can say my application is integrated with this system. Somebody else can say their system is integrated with that system. And what we're talking about are two completely different things, yet we use the same term of integration. So as a framework I'm going to put up here is 4 levels. And some of you have seen me speak, have heard me talk about this. But I really think it's important internally to differentiate when you're looking at different software vendors that say they integrate. Are they integrated at level 4 or level 1? I can do a level 1 integration, say, hey, we're integrated in like 5 minutes. Hey, there's a link on our site. I put this hyperlink in. You click on that. It launches you to this page on this other site. We're integrated. What's not integrated about that? Well, again, technically, you could argue, yeah, that's integration. That's probably, as a client, not what you're looking for. You want to dig down. Are we talking about data integration? So as we get into level 2, we're talking about the single sign-on. So now not only am I linking to the site, but I'm authenticating. So if I'm coming from this tool to that tool, it knows who I am in context. And ideally, it actually knows the context of if I'm in a client relationship, if I'm in Joe Client, it'll authenticate me and link me to the relevant capabilities in the second package that are related to Joe Client. So that's level 2. As we get into level 3, now we're talking about passing data back and forth. And there's, you know, unidirectional and bidirectional. I won't get into all the specifics. But the point is we don't want to rekey data. If we've got data over here, we want the data to go over there. We want to click a button. We want to have it happen magically. And level 4 is where things get really interesting. Now we're using things like web services. We're actually doing orchestration of processes. We're sending a set of variables and querying, say, hey, Mr. Software Package, I'm going to send you this stuff, and I want you to return me this outcome, and then I'm going to take this deliverable, and I'm going to go do something with it. That's where you get into more of the automation type capabilities. So when you think of where the big efficiency gains are, one is, you know, not rekeying data. Because the reality is if we look at level 2, yeah, I mean, logging in takes me like 20 seconds or 25 seconds. So single sign-on is certainly important, but I'm really only saving 25 seconds. If I have to rekey, you know, 90 QSIPs worth of data, and you can eliminate that, that's a much more meaningful outcome. And if you can actually go in and orchestrate a bunch of processes and tasks that I used to have a human do, and return them, then you're talking about significant cost saves. And that's what I'm going to really drill into with the utilization framework here in a second. So bottom line, why do I care about integration? Really 4 things. The inputting the data, manual input, we talked about that. We also error rates. You know, whenever you're keying stuff, you can fat finger it. And number 3, consistency, and then ultimately the client experience, where you're able to deliver more value to the end client at lower cost. And I think that's, you know, one of the things Deborah talked about in terms of robo-advisors. It's a real threat, and what it's going to do, the one thing I'm certain, again, I can't tell you precisely who's going to win, who's going to lose, but what I can tell you precisely is that there's going to be an increased level of transparency, and the bar in terms of cost value is going one direction, and that's up. And if these competitors have all this stuff systematized and automated, so it costs you $300 to do because you've got 2 staff people spending a couple hours, it costs them 10 cents to do, that's a huge problem. You've got to solve that. You've got to use the same kinds of technology and integration and automation that they have, and then add the human touch. And that's where you've got the differentiation. So let me get into the 5 levels of utilization. I've been writing some blogs on this to kind of visualize what this looks like. And I like drawing cartoons. We have a great graphic artist on our team that puts these together. And it just sort of articulates the 5 levels. I'm going to go through each. But the one thing I want you to notice as you look at this diagram is notice that I really emphasize the behavioral change. So if you look at the size of the steps, the different ladders, you can see that first ladder is real rickety and hard to climb up, whereas at level 4 to 5, it's just a couple of steps. I think kind of bear that in mind, because that, again, when we get to root cause, that's going to be your biggest barrier, is behavioral change. Okay, so let's talk about level 1. So how do I get my work done? Well, it's just in my head. What does that mean? Who knows? We can't look into your head, but it seems to work. So everyone starts at level 1. They're finding some way to get something done. We don't know if it was training or they'd written something down or whatever, but it's happening. Now, it's really harder than it looks to get from level 1 to level 2, which is because you're really doing two things. Number one is you're actually writing it down in a very specific format. And number two is you're gaining alignment, especially when you're talking about a team practice, is that there's not 3 sets of written down instructions as to how to do this, that everybody involved in that process has worked together and said, okay, I do it this way, you do it that way, he does it this way, we're gonna get together, we're gonna agree on one way, and that's gonna be the standard process that we have for the firm. And there's some interesting debate and discussion. Well, is my way better than this person's way? And we've gotten in the middle of facilitating a number of those kinds of discussions, and it gets very interesting. And I won't get into all the details, but just don't underestimate the challenge of doing that. So then we go into level 3. So now we're going to take advantage of technology. And what we're seeing is there's a lot of tools. Typically the ones I see most common are the CRM systems and the document management systems that have some pretty powerful workflow technologies, and they keep getting better. I know there's some releases coming out in the fall, different vendors releasing new capabilities. This is an area when I talk to vendors, especially both CRM and document management vendors, that they're spending a lot of time and a lot of money to make these tools much more effective and much more usable. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to determine how you want to use them. They're not giving you the instruction sets. They're saying, hey, how will you run your business? We're flexible. We can accommodate any one of those different models. Now, here's something that's interesting, though. It's actually less efficient to go from a paper checklist to a CRM set of tasks. Why? Well, if I've got a set of written tasks down, I've got, say, 5 steps, I can check those 5 steps off in about 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's real simple. If I have to go into my CRM system, got the task, I've got to load the tasks, I've got to hit the drop-down menu, what the status is, I've got to hit the save button. So that's going from about 1 second per task to maybe 7 or 8. So you've got to acknowledge that, well, why can't I just use my paper checklist? Isn't that good enough? Well, the fact of the matter is that there's no auditability, there's no reporting, and there's no path to automation, and that's what we're trying to get to. But I think sometimes we ignore how hard it is to get people to say, hey, what I'm doing is working, this is adding overhead. And I think you've got to be brutally honest about show the why. Here's why we are legitimately asking you to do more work, because it is more work. It doesn't sound like much, but I've sat with assistants, and boy, oh boy, to them, that difference between 1 second and 7 seconds and the stupid CRM system clicking this stuff is a big, big deal when they're not used to it, okay? Now the magic happens as we move to level 3 to level 4. At level 4, now we can actually begin to ask our technology to orchestrate some of these workflows, things that we might have been doing manually, doing automatically. So if we have a set of reports that we run, we can actually program that script. Hey, I want you to go run these reports in this order, in this sequence, automatically, and return it in a PDF format into this folder. That becomes very powerful. I'm going to give you a concrete example of how it completely changes the economics of how people run their practice. Level 5 is what we're beginning to see as vendors in this room begin to integrate, remember our level 4 utilization? As we begin to get integrations between firms, now we can actually put smart business logic involved. So an example might be, hey, Mr. CRM system, I want you to go to Mr. Portfolio Management System, get all the current values. I want you to pass it to the financial planning system. I want you to run an updated plan if the probability score is less than 90, then I want you to trigger this set of tasks off. If it's greater than 90, then a different set of tasks. So if the probability is lower, I want to do, the client's going to say, hey, it sounds like I'm not, on track toward my retirement goal. What can we do? If the probability is really high, I don't really have to do some of that preparation. I can just tell the client, hey, everything's good, you're on track. Well, I can systematize that. And I can make it so that if I hire a new employee, I don't have to worry about that stuff. Again, they can focus on more of the high human value-added activities that really differentiate you in the mind of the client. Simple things like, your client's grandson hit a home run in Little League. You clip an article out, you have your assistant, instead of keying a bunch of reports, they're actually looking at information that matters and saying, hey, congratulations, Mr. Klein, I saw Johnny hit the game-winning home run. Do you think that grandparent isn't super proud of Johnny and the fact that you, as a financial advisor, actually acknowledge that? Those are the things that I would call high human value added, that human touch. And that's why people are going to pay advisors for that relationship. What they're not going to pay them for, especially in the age of the robos, is to go keystroke different reports. Hey, I want to run the realized gains and loss and the unrealized gains. I want this parameter. I'm not paying you for that. I can get that automatically at virtually no cost. What I'm going to pay for is someone who understands me, understands how important my grandson, helps me think through the issues related to my estate. Robos can't do that. They don't understand me. They don't understand my values. They don't understand any of that stuff. That's what's going to continue to differentiate advisors, and why I think there's going to be a very bright future in the advisory business for human advisors, but the pressure is going to be on there. So what's next? Again, we talked about workflow rules. We're seeing consumer examples. So this is consumers more and more, especially your younger tech-savvy investors, are using these tools on their own. Who in this room has seen IFTT or Zapier? If you haven't, go check these things out. It's amazing. You can do essentially level 5 integration doing cross-application workflows, again, on a simplistic level, as a consumer for free. So if I go to IFTT and I say, okay, IFTT, I want you to go look in my email box. Anytime any email has the words receipt, order, I want you to automatically route that into this folder in Dropbox. So if I ever want to see my receipts for tax purposes, again, no human intervention, no nothing, for free online. So as a consumer, I'm seeing, hey, this stuff is really inexpensive. I can do this on my own. What's my advisor doing to move up the value chain? So I think that you're going to see more and more expectations around that. A couple of other examples. Let's just talk about the economics. So let's just do an example. So if you have your tools integrated, you've defined your workflows, you have a workflow engine for you. Let's look at the before and after. So before, I log into my CRM, I pull up client meeting tasks, I log into my portfolio management system, log into my financial planning systems, go in the CRM, get the outstanding action items, collate all these documents manually, put all this stuff together. I'm spending a ton of time. After, if I've got all this into an automated workflow, I click a button, the workflow engine does all this stuff. We're talking about a 99% decrease in cost. So we're not talking about taking a process that's currently $100 and making it $90, or taking a process that's $100 and making it $10. We're talking about taking a process that's $100 and getting it down to 10 cents. That's how firms are going to compete going forward. They're going to compete by really systematizing the table stakes type things and then focusing on the unique human value added activities that come in. The other beauty of this is it really, from a training standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from integration with a back office standpoint, makes it easier, because now I don't have to train people on how to do this stuff. It's systematized automatically. Again, you're not going to be able to do this with every workflow that you have, but the more and more you're going to be able to do this. You heard LaserApp talk about how they're releasing smart rules and engines in terms of forms. That's going to extend this kind of automated workflow capability into more and more of the back office. But my singular point is, do not underestimate the challenge of gaining alignment at a level of specificity that allows you to use those tools. That's the hard part. So let's just summarize for a minute here. What did we learn in this presentation? We learned that when you combine workflow integration, you create immense business value. And this really alters the economics of the advisor's business and alters the economics of your business. Because who in the room thinks that consumers are not going to expect more for less? Anyone think that consumers are going to say, yeah, you know, this transparency thing, and you know, I'd rather pay more money to get less value? Anyone think that? No. But what are you doing about it? You know, if we know that that's a fundamental hard trend, it's not a debatable fact. I mean, consumers are going to demand more for less. What are we doing in this room to prepare our firms and our advisors to be able to address that issue? How are we fundamentally altering the economics of doing a lot of these just foundational tasks that are must-haves? Again, you don't get any credit for being able to produce a quality set of performance reports, but you get a ton of, you know, it's a baseline expectation. If you don't do it, you're basically deemed incompetent, and you know, why am I doing business with you? You can't even produce any basic reports on how I'm doing. Isn't that what I pay you for? But if you do a great job, you've just done what they expect. And I think that's really, really important. Again, beginning the processes right and the behavioral changes, I think about budgeting for this stuff. A third of it goes into the technology. We've got to have the right tools. You've got the right vendors next door there to do that. Third of it is the process engineering, gaining alignment and realizing that, you know what, you think you're aligned until you put pen to paper and get people in the room with the sticky notes and so forth. You realize, gosh, there's some more things that have to be discussed and debated here than I originally anticipated. And then obviously the last third, driving the behavioral change, getting at the why and so forth. So this is not sci-fi. This is in production today. I can think of many examples. There's firms in this room today that are doing this. So if you're not, you need to start. And it's a journey. You know, this is, you know, it's not something that you, a checkbox item. Hey, I've automated my workflow. Similarly to the way you would manage a portfolio. You know, you set up a portfolio allocation. You still have to monitor and rebalance it. This is an ongoing effort. And it's sort of a fundamental skill set every broker-dealer and every firm has to have, is a mechanism to look at these workflows, look at the economics, constantly rebalance and improve that, get feedback loops. Again, as we've implemented a lot of these automated workflows, almost never are they perfect the first time around. Once they meet users, their user said, well, it doesn't accommodate this, or what about this, or what about that? So putting structure in place to be able to accommodate that is really important. So one of the other tips I'll leave you with is think of having a process committee. Similar to the way you have an investment committee, have an internal, at the broker-dealer level, a process committee that helps people think through these problems, provides a mechanism for honest discourse on this. Again, if you do these things, it's going to fundamentally alter the economics of your business and your advisor's business. Thank you for your time today, and really enjoying the conference. If you want to talk with me later, feel free to reach out.